and ask for refuge from violence, from persecution, and from fear. All of us can agree that the process of processing and granting asylum or not must be orderly, but it also must be humane. And as a father, as a dad, I can't imagine anything worse than having one's child torn from their arms. And as a Jewish American, I am horrified by the echoes of this policy with our own people's history. Promising a bath or a shower as a ruse to separate families. Treating small children like common criminals. Locking them up in cages at a warehouse converted border detention facility. Opening tent cities to house migrant children, denying them the love and support of their parents. In the face of this horror, nearly 3,000 children forcibly separated from their parents by our government, we cannot look away, and we will not look away. We cannot become numb to what is happening. We will elevate the stories of these families suffering unimaginable trauma, and we will make sure that the country pays attention in the midst of this moral crisis. And that is why we are here today. We are here to say that this must stop now. We are here to invoke that adage, as they say, of never again. Those families, those children escaping persecution and violence, seeking a better life in these United States, only to have their families torn apart, again, we cannot and will not look away or go numb. We will fight for them every step of the way. Because tearing apart these families does nothing, no matter what you hear, to make our country safer. Instead, it is a betrayal of our country. It is an attack on our value, and it diminishes us all. We should listen to the outcries of protest from religious leaders of all faiths, from political leaders like the First Lady herself. And look at this group here today. We come from many backgrounds, and sometimes we disagree with each other, but we will stand together in the face of a clear injustice. Make no mistake. We will not allow this administration's cruel policies to tarnish our country. The Attorney General, the Secretary of Homeland Security, they have the power to stop this crisis, and we will not let up. We will not give in until they do. They will stop the family separations and allow the immigrants the right to seek safety and asylum without fear for their children, without being them taken from them as cruel punishment. As long as this president, as long as this administration tears apart immigrant families, whether it's at the border or through arrests and detentions all over the country, whether it snatches them in schools or courthouses or other public places, please know that the ADL stands with our civil rights here colleagues today. We stand with these immigrant families here today, and we stand with these children now and forever, because we will never stop fighting for our shared values of fairness and equality, and for our vision of America as a nation that believes in and strives for justice and fair treatment to all. Sure. Now, if I might, let me introduce Congressman Dan Schakowsky from Illinois.
I am so proud to be here today with all these stalwarts who are standing up against the unspeakable cruelty that we're seeing. What do you call a country that institutionalizes child abuse? Sadly, today you call that country the United States of America. I am the daughter, the proud daughter of immigrant parents. And this is what America is about. It is a country that is made by and for immigrants. And the Trump administration is trying to redefine what America is. They took the words, "we are a country of immigrants," out of the mission statement of the Immigration and Naturalization Service. They want to say we are not an immigrant country, but they cannot, and they will not. And Americans' jaws are dropping. Their hearts are breaking as they hear the voices of children yelling, "Daddy, Daddy." When they see a 2-year-old standing there screaming, those images that are coming to us. So we call on President Trump, who lies about whose responsibility it is. It is his. It is the Attorney General of the United States, Jeff Sessions. And we say, stop it, because you can. And let's have families reunited now. Thank you.
Cindy Benavides from LULAC.
Good afternoon. Buenas tardes. Over 30 years ago, my mother left Honduras with my 2-year-old brother and her 1-year-old daughter, me. I was the age of my daughter, America, at the time when I came to the U.S. She left because she simply wanted safety and a chance for her children to live. When Border Patrol officers stopped her, she was allowed to keep us with her. The time when family unity was viewed as sacred marked a period when the U.S. acknowledged the humanity in all individuals, regardless of their background. Due to this administration's zero-tolerance policy, 2,000 children have been taken away from their parents in a 43-day window. President Trump, you are using our babies and our children as hostages. This policy violates multiple international recognized human rights and creates deep emotional harm and trauma to these families. The affected human beings are parents seeking asylum and legal humanitarian protection in the U.S. Your administration's zero-tolerance policy means that often migrants are deported before ever being allowed to apply for asylum. This policy is your choice, Mr. President, one that is literally torturing small children. President Trump, you can stop separating families by rescinding it now. No laws say that we have to separate families at the border. No laws say that we have to have zero tolerance for people who are fleeing violence and death. The Refugee Act of 1980 does say that the Attorney General shall establish a procedure for migrants to apply for asylum, irrespective of their status. Further, insofar as all of us are global citizens, we subscribe to a set of rights that transcends borders, human rights. Article 3 of the UN's Universal Declaration of Human Rights says that the right to life, liberty, and personal security knows no borders. Article 5 says that the right to freedom from torture and degrading treatment knows no borders. President Trump, in the land of the free, this needs to be recognized, or else we disgrace our nation and degrade the value of our commonly shared humanity. I invite you, President Trump, to stand with your fellow humans and recognize this humanitarian crisis for the apolitical situation it truly should be. Rescind this policy now. For those watching at home, we need your help to keep families united. Indifference is a killer. Text UNITED to 52886 to send a message to your member of Congress to keep families together. Text 52886 to keep families together. We are bearing witness to the dehumanization of an entire population, and we must act even if getting involved inconveniences us by disrupting our normal routines. failing to do so effectively denies the humanity of these families. Text United to 52886. I'm going to end with a story. Earlier this month, while traveling from San Antonio, I saw 4 mothers at the airport who had been detained for the last 3 months for crossing the border without documentation. Instead of seeing 4 broken and helpless individuals who had been ripped from their children and their only reason for living, I saw 4 mothers smiling with their children in hand. Never mind that they had only the simple clothes that they wore and recyclable yellow bags to hold all that they carried. They had each other, they had their children, and they were safe from untold violence and cruelty that they fled. And so I ask my fellow neighbors and Americans, at night, when these mothers put their children to bed and turn off the lights, and their children say, "Mommy, I'm scared," they can say, "Mommy is here." Thank you.
Melanie Campbell of Black Women's Roundtable.
Thank you, Reverend Sharpton, Janet, and all of my colleagues here today. I will be brief. This is a cool day. The unjust White House policy to separate 2,000 children from their parents at the Mexican border who are fleeing for their lives, seeking asylum from violence and persecution in their home countries is tantamount to government-sanctioned child abuse. This administration is using babies, and there are babies, all of our babies, as pawns to build a wall on the border and using quote-unquote rule of law as their excuse to commit these inhumane atrocities. I say, and we say, shame on President Trump and shame on the GOP congressional leadership for choosing partisan gain over human rights and compassion for the least of these God's children that are being traumatized and ripped apart from their mothers and fathers. We all have to ask ourselves this question: what kind of nation are we becoming? If we continue to allow babies, little girls and boys, to be put in cages and left alone, unnurtured, wailing and crying themselves to sleep at night, we have to ask ourselves, what kind of nation are we becoming? We must all speak up and challenge these immoral acts by our government. God is not pleased, and voters of good conscience will remember this in November. Thank you.
Kristen Clark, President and Executive Director of the Lawyers Committee on Civil Rights.
Good morning. We are here today, united Black, brown, white, Christian, Jewish, and Muslim, to speak out against one of the greatest humanitarian and political crises of our time. Holding children hostage in concentration camps is the new political bargaining chip of this administration, and it is unconscionable. We've all seen the reports of the children being held behind chain-linked cages, forced to sleep on cold floors, draped in a single tinfoil blanket, fed an apple a day and a few cups of water. Teenagers feeding babies. Make no mistake, as Melanie noted, this is government-sanctioned child abuse. Despite the president's claims, separating immigrant families is not mandated by the law. This is the result of this administration's own intentional and callous action, a policy announced by Attorney General Jeff Sessions. This action has undermined our country's standing on the world stage and invited condemnation from every corner of this country and every corner of the globe. Countries like El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras are facing a surge of violence, pushing those most vulnerable to seek asylum here in the U.S. And instead of extending a hand to those most vulnerable, women and children forced to leave their homes, our Attorney General continues his attack on immigrants, reversing a ruling by an immigration court that makes it more difficult for those who seek asylum here to claim fears of domestic abuse or gang violence as legitimate reasons to gain entry into the U.S. When Sessions cites the Bible as an attempt to justify this immoral and humanitarian crisis, we are reminded that this isn't the first time that this country has deployed religion to rationalize and promote the spread of evil. The Bible has been exploited to justify slavery, attacks on the LGBTQ community, and white supremacy. Attorney General Jeff Sessions has once again made clear the bias and hostility that informs his outlook on the law. He is incapable of carrying out his duties fairly and with independence. Now's the time for all Americans to speak out. As Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, the silence of the good people is more dangerous than the brutality of the bad people. We call on the Senate to act now to rein in this administration's outrageous, unlawful, and inhumane conduct. It's time to stop tweeting and time to act. The apathy and silence of our elected officials is deafening, and those who choose to acquiesce from fear of losing their base or fear of retaliation by a presidential tweet are complicit and must be held accountable. When we reflect on this moment in time, will this Congress be remembered as a passive witness to a humanitarian crisis? Now is not the time for inaction. To those in Congress who choose politics over morality, be willing to live with the incalculable damage your silence will cause a generation of children. Thank you.
Let me acknowledge with us, who are standing with us from the National Center for Transgender Equality, Myra Kessling. Let me acknowledge Dr. E. Faye Williams of the National Congress of Black Women and Reverend Andrea Alexander of the National Council of Churches. Let me say that we, again, stand collectively, we stand firmly, and let me make a personal note to Attorney General Sessions, who makes such a case about his being a Sunday school teacher and a practicing Christian. Don't quote the Bible, read the Bible. There was a baby 2,000 years ago who an angel, according to the scripture, told his father Joseph that you should flee because they're going to try and kill the baby. Joseph got Mary, his wife, and the baby and fled to Egypt. He was a refugee because he was seeking refuge in Egypt. The reason I stand here, Attorney General Sessions, is I believe in a refugee from Bethlehem. So I cannot look on the inhumanity to refugees from Mexico. I'm just glad that they didn't have someone in Egypt that was Trump-like that snatched Jesus from Mary's arms.
Amen.
We'll take 2 or 3 questions.
Can I just mention something? While folks are asking questions, I just wanted to note, it's pretty hot here today, right? Imagine that you were hundreds or thousands of children. Imagine you were in a tent. Imagine you were 45 minutes outside of El Paso, Texas. You don't have to imagine that. That's happening right now. There is a tent city, and apparently, according to this administration, more to come. That's the reality that we're living in today, and it is a reality that we can stop this. This is within the power of Attorney General Sessions and Donald Trump. Despite their intentions to sow confusion and despite their outright lies about who's responsible, they are responsible, they are accountable, they own this policy, and President Trump and Attorney General Sessions have the power to end it. It is a disgrace and a shame that we would be housing children in tent cities out in the desert.
Thank you to all our social justice leaders for being here today. This concludes the press conference, but I'm sure everybody will be available for questions.
Thank you, Congressman Soto.
Thank you.
Thank you.